Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Boucher, fantasy romance author, and I'm really excited to be here today with the Australian Romance Readers Association and the Romantic Rendezvous Lockdown Version Conference with two authors that I absolutely adore, Maria Vale and Adriana Anders, who are two of the most exciting new storytellers that I've read in the last couple of years. I love their stories and their voices and the perspective they bring to their books. And I'd love for them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they write. We could maybe start with Maria. This is one of her books, Maria Vale. Forever Wolf is the third in her series about wolf shifters. And I'll let Maria start, and then we'll go to Adriana, who will tell us about her books, including her latest, Whiteout. Maria?
Thank you so much, Amanda. Adriana, it's wonderful to see you again. I write paranormal romances, which they're wolf shifters, but rather than having a shifter who is trying to keep his bestial self under wraps, it's about wolves who are first and foremost wolves, and then they use their time in skin to protect their land, their pack, and their sacred wild selves, and of course, the people they love. So that's it.
And they're wonderful.
Hi, everybody.
What
I'm
about you?
Adriana Anders. I love Maria's books, and I love Amanda's books too. It's super exciting to be here talking to you guys today. I write romantic suspense and contemporary romance. My most recent release was what Amanda showed you, Whiteout. It is a survival romance set in Antarctica, and it's a wild, thrilling chase from bad guys, people running from the elements. It is, I think it's an edge of your seat, sort of very sexy, fast-paced romance. That's at least what I was going for. My other books are sort of cool. My other books are slightly darker contemporary romance, and all of them are quite sexy. And that's
the Black Canvas series, which starts with Under Her Skin. That's a good lead in to, yeah, such a beautiful cover. Something I wanted to ask you about, these are, your books are in a contemporary setting, but your first series is set in Virginia, where you lived much of your life, and then you switched to a climate like Antarctica. What drew you to these different settings for your writing?
Virginia was pretty easy. I had moved back and forth between Virginia and other places, and I kept going back because it was so beautiful. I lived in central Virginia, in Charlottesville in the mountains. The Blue Ridge Mountains were just sort of this magical, magnetic place that always drew me. And so I really wanted to write about that area, and I knew it, and I felt comfortable writing it. Jump to Antarctica, which I obviously, you know, not that many people have gotten to go, although I envy those who have. I was drawn to the place initially because it just seemed like such an out of the way place for an adventure. And I thought, can people actually even survive there? And so I started researching and reading a ton of books, a ton of blogs from people who were living there year long. But you know, they live in research stations and they live inside. And so it's just an incredibly, incredibly difficult place to live. It's totally unforgiving. And by the end of my research, which actually took months, I was totally in love with it. I would go there in a heartbeat.
Even though you couldn't really spend very much time outside. I guess it would depend on the season, but
it does depend on the season.
Living in our current lockdown, only much even harder. Don't go out.
Yeah, we think lockdown is tough. People who stay year-round, especially at the South Pole, don't, I mean, they do a few outings here and there, but most of the research, at least the research that involves the environment, stops. There is, however, research on, you know, how people's bodies and brains react to that kind of environment and being shut in like that. much like I imagine there's research happening right now. I imagine, we'll find some
Yeah.
stuff out over the next few years.
Good
What
point.
about you, Amanda? What
Yeah,
drew
Maria.
you to fantasy?
Well, to fantasy, and also to the setting where you placed your wolf pack, which is a very remote, wild northern part of New York State. Can you tell us a bit about that and why you chose that?
I chose it because I initially have the pack moved there in the 17th century. So it wasn't practical to make it farther inland than the Adirondacks. And besides which, my father had lived there. And so I'd spent a lot of time in the southern tier, sort of the southern edge of the Adirondacks, and going up there visiting. And it is one of the oldest and one of the largest contiguous, relatively untouched stretches of forest land. And for a wolf pack, that just made sense.
They need the wilderness, of course. Yeah.
Right, you have this wilderness, but you have enough human interaction for that to be an issue, for them to have to actually deal with people. And it's not as though they're so far away that they can pretend to just be wolves.
Right. It would be almost easier if they were in Antarctica where the wolves couldn't survive. But you could write a penguin romance, right?
Well, I could do Chernobyl. Right, you could do Chernobyl because the wolves there are doing quite well.
Oh, there you go.
Exactly.
So would you consider, Maria, your books paranormal or fantasy, or does it straddle some line in between?
I mean, I think I am never quite sure about the distinction between paranormal romance. It took me a while to figure out what the difference was between urban fantasy and paranormal romance. I mean, I think in some ways, I've heard some people refer to your books as urban fantasy, which strikes me as odd. I think because they're not quite as used to the fantasy romance. But no, I think it's paranormal romance, though there is sort of more of an emphasis on a cohesive world, which I consider more of a fantasy.
I think that's a really good point. So the paranormal aspect with the shifters, and we're living in our actual world, is there because you're in New York State, and you make references to places that we know of in our modern times, but there is a ton of world building which really leads into more of a fantasy writing. So,
right. I think it's very complicated to, we have these divisions that were started up a long time ago, and I think things are shifting. I think, what you have done has moved the parameters of romance. And
I'm not sure I can take credit for anything as big as that.
No. But I do think that you and a number of other people, but it's really changing what we think of as romance, what we think of fantasy, the divisions that there are between these different subgenres.
Yes, and I think fantasy romance has definitely become more popular in the last few years, and people who had never heard of it before suddenly say, oh yeah, I know what that is, and hopefully are discovering our books.
Right.
And it's true that really urban fantasy was the thing for a long time, or your paranormal with your vampires and werewolves, but done very differently than your wolves, who are really about being the wolf rather than being the person.
Right.
So yeah, and it's exciting to see sort of an upsurge in fantasy in general in writing. Although, Adriana, we love contemporary, and there's a ton out there and so many good choices. What makes you want to write with a contemporary voice in our own time and place, if we can call Antarctica our own place?
I'm not sure that I necessarily just want to write that, but it's, I always feel, first of all, I would say that I hate researching, but it's not actually true because I really loved researching. I was always afraid of it. It takes a lot of time. And, I love reading historicals, for example. but I always thought that I would not have the researching chops to do that. After writing the Antarctica book, I thought, well, maybe I could do it. I guess part of it is that there's so many issues today. There's so much going on in this world. I think it's really interesting to write from the perspective of somebody like me, or one of you guys, somebody who could be one of our readers, and sort of show them a little perspective into somebody else's life, what it would be like having certain things happen to them, being thrown into different environments where they had to survive. I kind of like the every woman story, taking an average person and asking them to do something extraordinary is exciting to me. So that's a big thing.
Definitely.
That's definitely what
I can totally see that. Yes, exactly what happens in Whiteout. The heroine could be any of us, really.
Absolutely.
And she gets thrown into an extraordinary situation where she has to survive and learn, what's inside her. How far can she go to survive herself and also to help other people, which I think is actually a theme in all of our writing. We have these characters that are so full of strength and emotion, but they don't necessarily know that right from the beginning. It's something that grows throughout the story as they discover who they are and what they're capable of. And I think that journey, even if it's from a contemporary perspective, a contemporary reader could put themselves in that position maybe more easily, but it's really the story of all our heroines, whether it's in a fantasy world or the future or in a wolf pack. I think all of our writing stems from deep emotional perspectives within the characters. It's really character driven and tons of heart, emotion, some heat too.
I think that's how romance has changed in a way. I mean, I think it used to be much more just about the romance, and increasingly is about usually a woman's, but someone's journey. And I think you're absolutely right about that, that it's become much more. I see this almost everywhere and across most subgenres, that the person at the end of the book is stronger than they were at the beginning.
Yes, there's definitely a lot more evolution.
Right.
Yeah, both within the couple and individually, for both the male and female. If it's or female, whatever, whoever your main male, whatever, whoever your main characters are, as a couple, because it's romance, that it's the individual journey and the couple's journey. And I think that's so exciting to see both. Exactly. And I think it's a real challenge for the romance authors to juggle both of those stories. It's almost writing two books at once. You're writing a book within a book. You're writing a book about the couple, and you're writing a book about the individual characters. And somehow you have to weave that together and bring them to their happily ever after. It's exciting. I think it's a challenging thing that we do. And I think you guys do it wonderfully, which is why I love your book so much.
Yeah.
One thing about that growth is that what I like about all of your books, for example, and a lot of the books that I read today, is the growth it's not like some guy, in my male-female romances, because you did say, romances encompass a lot more than just one man, one woman. But to be able to create a story where two people or more people evolve in such a way together, but not necessarily dependent on each other, is a big challenge. And it's one that I really adore. I love that we can, we can show their growth, but they don't need that magical other person, but they just sort of help them a little bit. And I think I love that side of a love story.
Right.
I absolutely agree. And it's not a question of I need someone. It's a question of I want to share something with someone and we're better together. Yeah. But I'm still okay, on my own, because I've had this journey now. And but better together in the end is, that's the idea of a romance with whatever couple, is going on this path together. So tell me about your actual writing process. Do you work in the morning, in the afternoon? How much time do you spend writing, or does it completely vary? Adriana, can you start?
Sure. So my answer 2 years ago was very different from my answer today. You know,
Let's not
when
take the current context. A typical
Okay.
pre-coronavirus, pre-children at home all day, pre all that.
Well,
What's
my
a
life has
typical writing
changed.
day?
Yeah, things have changed even beyond that. So when I first started writing, when I first started writing, I had just had a baby. And so I was on maternity leave and I just wrote all the time. As soon as I had to go back to work, I found a way to be able to write 1 day a week. And that's a pace that I maintained for several years until I moved to France with my family 2 years ago. And things changed because my children were much more dependent on me. So at that point, it went down, even though I didn't have a full-time job anymore, you know, ironically. Today, I would say if on an ideal schedule, I write 2 or 3 hours every morning, 5 mornings a week. I'd like to be able to do more, but and then we have all our marketing and all the other stuff, but that's pretty much, you know, if I'm having a good week, that's what I'm doing.
2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then more marketing maybe in the afternoon.
Ideally, I just, you know, I don't know the last time it was that structured, but yes, that would be ideal.
I know what you mean. What about you, Maria? What is your typical workday like?
I think there isn't a sort of typical. I agree that things change completely when you're unpublished. You only have this thing to work on. You only have this book. You have no other, there's nothing else that's asking for your, I mean, yes, you have your family, you have your work, you have this book. And I mean, in a way, I found it much easier to concentrate. And so I fit it into the interstices of my life. Whenever I had a chance, I would work on it. But now, you know, when you're working on it, it feels like, wait, but there's also this that I should be doing, or this I should be preparing for, or, you know, have I responded to that person on Facebook? Have I done this campaign for this sale that I've got for these previous books? There are all these other things that start to pick away at the purity of this time that used to be there. And I kind of miss that. I miss that pure time. But
I agree so much.
I now work best first thing in the morning. Like if I can get up at 5 o'clock and sneak off without waking up anybody in the household, that is my most productive time, just without a doubt. And I'm trying to get better at not checking social media during that time. So just doing that, and then I'll check whatever else needs to be done. My email, anything else, I try to save until afterwards.
I think that's an excellent idea and something that I need to do. And I remember actually having a conversation with Adriana about not checking social media until after a few hours of work. And I think she had read a study. We said it increased productivity. And so
it was Jeffy Kennedy. Jeffy Kennedy had published a blog post.
Okay.
She's another fantasy
Jeffy
writer.
Kennedy is fantasy romance, wonderful books.
Right.
Also, and I couldn't remember where that had come from, but I remember talking with you about it and thinking I have to do that. And so far, of course, it was about three or 4 months ago, this conversation, and that's just when, you know, the world went crazy anyway and everything changed. So I haven't actually, you know, applied this new knowledge to my life yet, but I should, because I have been exceptionally unproductive in the last few months, but I'm trying not to put too much stress on myself. I do have the homeschooling going on, kids, and I think it's hard. I didn't think it would be a problem for me because I've been creative through other difficult moments in my life, but I have not found it easy to be creative at this time. Or it might be more of a problem of concentration than creativity. I'm not really sure, but either way, nothing's really happening work-wise at the moment, and I need to buckle down, and I see that coming. And I'm kind of making my way there, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, that's why one of the things that I had not realized was that a lot of writers get together and do writing sprints, which is something I don't know if readers pay any attention to, but occasionally you'll see somebody saying, anyone want to do a writing sprint? And actually it is helpful to me
Oh,
to
have you
sort
tried
of
that?
and say that there are, yes, we're all going to sit down, we're all going to write. It's stupid, but it's some kind of accountability. And it's with people who don't care whether you've written 1,200 words or 500 words, you're just trying to do it together.
Yeah, I've done a lot of
never done that. Yeah. I find I've always been a really solitary writer, and I don't usually show my work to anyone till it's almost complete in my mind. You know, then it needs revisions and everything. But I always sort of keep the whole process and all the parts of it to myself, at least for a long time. And so these kind of things don't really occur to me, but maybe it would help with moving things along faster too. So good idea. I'm going to try it. You guys will sprint soon. How about that? So I actually have a couple of questions from a reader that we should get to before our time runs out. There's one for each of you. I'll start with Maria. This is a question from, I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read this because it's really small. Malvina Yock sent in questions for us. So Maria, she says, hi Maria, I was curious to know how you as a medievalist discovered your voice writing paranormal romance. Do these two sides of you tend to blend in your mind, or are they distinctly different?
I actually, a long time ago when I was first studying Old English, which is not, you know, Chaucer or anything else, it's much older than that. And I heard my teachers saying Cadman's hymn. I thought that was a sound that sounded very raw and wild to me and sounded sort of like a wolf's call if it had been turned into a language. And I just squirreled that away in the back of my brain. And then when I started thinking about this wolf pack, and I assumed like any endangered group, they would be very conservative. And so I started to draw on my knowledge of Anglo-Saxon history and literature and mythology. And one of the joys of that is that Anglo-Saxon mythology has an enormous number of wolves. They're usually not terribly good. But I thought there was always a way of sort of reinterpreting the mythology to make the wolves sort of the heroes in their own mind. I mean, the gods are pretty creepy, as you know, Amanda. Gods can be, it can be a hard group to have any great love.
Yes, I know. I have the Greek mythology aspect in my books, and
exactly.
The gods are, they can do anything and everything, can't they?
Yep. And it makes them a little arbitrary. So I just thought I would, that I could actually use at least part of what I had studied as a medievalist to help me create this world of wolves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you did a wonderful job of blending the two. And I remember just the prologue of your first book, The Last Wolf. I was reading the prologue and I felt like I was just immersed already in this, you know, old England. And then I wasn't quite sure where you were going with it, because then all of a sudden we switched to modern day. And I was like, oh, because I thought maybe this would be historical this way. And it was so neat the way you just set us up with something and then threw us into a new situation where, you know, all of that still came with this pack, as you said, that you then placed in the Adirondacks, and the stories take place. The 17th century
was a great time to switch over, because that was a time when all the forests were, there was the Cromwell, and there was all the forests were being cut down. So it seemed to me like a good time to move them over. I did not want to continue in the 17th century in the United States, because my knowledge of the 17th century in the United States is nil. It's practically. So, right. I didn't
get
really
to write what you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And we also have a question for Adriana, so I'm going to read that. It's from the same person. So she says, I truly love the Black Canvas series. They were a bit different and a bit darker, than I normally read, but unputdownable. Thank you. Your characters seem to walk on the edge. Is that the same for all your books? Are they exhausting or exhilarating, or somewhere in between to write?
I love that question.
So are your characters exhausting or exhilarating, or somewhere in between?
Yes.
Yes to all.
To all of the above. You know, my first book from the Blank Canvas series was Under Her Skin. And I was writing something at the time, and I heard this radio story about a woman who gave free tattoo removal to people who had suffered from abuse or been tattooed against their will, or who'd been in gangs or had prison tattoos. And it was just, it exploded my brain, and it made me cry, and it just made me feel all these emotions. And I had a million ideas that stemmed from this, because I felt like, wow, this is a story that we haven't heard before. And I really wanted to tell this story. And I think that's just a big thing for me is I feel like everybody deserves a happily ever after. I don't think it needs to be limited to any one group or subset. And I don't think we have to all be happy in order to end up happy or to find love. Mm-hmm. And so people who, you know, live on the edge, people who maybe have suffered or had tough things happen to them, deserve love too. And sometimes it's really hard won. Sometimes you have to race till the end of a continent to get it. You know, there are all different kinds of things that can happen in these stories. And that's sort of what I love about writing from our brains. You know, our imaginations are just endless. And mm-hmm. So yeah, I like a hard won love story. And I try to write those. Even my shorter books, my novellas, I really try to pull from, and I'm not trying to be angsty. It's just what happens as I start writing, and sort of the inner pain comes out. And then people have hope. And I love being able to provide that hope in sort of dark times.
Well, I think that's really interesting what you say, because hope is something, this is actually a theme in my Kingmaker Chronicles. Hope is something that you have only because you understand having suffered. You know what pain and disappointment and, you know, difficulty and everything, you know, tons of bad things. Sure, we don't want to read about that. It could be backstory, or it could be happening, but you don't want to dwell on that eternally, of course. But if the characters haven't known what suffering is, how can they really know what joy is? So hope is the idea of coming out. If you can maintain hope, it means that you've understood loss or suffering, and you've come out stronger on the other side of it and can move forward from there. And I think that's something that we see in your writing, Adriana, a lot also. And I think I think it's a hopeful message to give to readers too, because who knows what has happened in their lives, good and bad, and everyone can have that hope that something better and a happily ever after is there waiting, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And Maria, what about I forgot what I was going to say. It was stemming from Adriana's question. Yeah, like go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it is, I think this point about hope is huge. And the point about, you know, it's one thing, this is one of the reasons I'm not a big reader of NA, you know, new adult, because to me, often there hasn't been a lot of actual, I don't want to say suffering, but there haven't been the really tough experiences. You know, I can't stand really romances where the only tough experience has been that some guy dropped you in high school. That is simply not enough. You know, overcoming that is not overcoming real difficulty. And I agree, you know, in both of your books, there are people overcoming tough things who move on. And at the end of both, you know, your emotions are tied up. It ties up my emotions in reading these books. And then the sort of sense of release, which is part of hope at the end of each book, is enormously important. So I do agree. And I think that's much of what romance is. I mean, really, that's one of the things I love most about romance.
I agree. And part of that is coming from getting deep into the perspective of the characters, which I really do with both of your books. And Maria, for example, your books, when I read them, I start thinking like I'm a wolf in the wild. I start dreaming about wolves running through the woods. I get so deep into your characters that I feel like, and your ability to show us a different perspective is so well done and so all-encompassing that
Thank you.
I think Adriana would agree with me. We just fall into these books and we can feel the emotions of the characters. And that's partly, you know, where we come from with our books and, you know, working through issues and moving on to hope. And it's the same in yours with, you know, learning about who they are and what the pack means to them. And you get so deep into these perspectives that you just feel like you're a part of something.
Yeah,
which I love about both of you.
Found family. I like found family stories a lot. So,
Yes.
you know, this is part of that found family.
Well, I think we have to sort of begin wrapping up, unfortunately, because I love talking with you guys. And the Australian Romance Readers Association has asked us to hold up a sign with our names and an author code. And it's to participate in a scavenger hunt. So we all have our papers that we're going to hold up. And I think maybe afterwards we'll all read our numbers aloud, just in case there's anyone with difficulty seeing what we put on the screen. So let's hold those up for the scavenger hunt.
Okay.
Do you guys have your codes?
Yep. I unfortunately don't have a printer, so my husband actually drew this for me.
Well, he's very talented.
Yeah.
It looks just like ours.
So do you want to read yours, Amanda?
Sure. So I'll spell my name. You can leave yours up, Adriana, I think, in case people are still writing them down. So it's Amanda, Amanda, Bouchet, Bouchet. And I'm going to have to take my code now to look at it. The code is 184391174. Maria, would you like to go next?
Yes, my name's Maria Vale, and it's V-A-L-E. And my code is 2364975.
And Adriana?
And I'm Adriana Anders, Adriana Anders, and my code is 383-59624.
Perfect. So I'm not sure what the scavenger hunt involves, but I'm excited to find out.
Exactly.
And this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
I love you.
It's great to talk to you.
You too, and I hope we'll all see each other in person one of these days.
Soon.
Would be nice.
I hope so. All right, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello.
Bye.